NBC News has just confirmed that actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner has died at the age of 54. Authorities in Costa Rica telling NBC News that Warner accidentally drowned while swimming in the ocean on Sunday. Warner is best known for, of course, his Emmy-nominated role.
Playa Grande, Costa Rica, a place where turquoise waves meet the dense, tangled arms of the jungle. On any other day, it's a postcard. But on July 20, something else took hold of that beach. Something darker. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, 54 years old, was on a family vacation, walking into the ocean for what should have been a moment of calm. Instead, it became his final scene. Authorities say a current pulled him under, bystanders rushed to drag him back to shore, and the Red Cross worked on him for over 20 minutes before declaring what no one wanted to believe: Warner was gone.
Incident took place on Sunday in Costa Rica. He was on a family vacation. He was swimming off of the coast of a town called Cocles in the province of Limon. He was swimming at Playa Grande. I mean, I've visited Costa Rica a few times. I was there with my family a few years ago, and those currents can be very strong.
But the official story? Accidental drowning, swept away by a current, no foul play, rings strangely hollow for many, especially when you consider how quickly the narrative was tidied up. Warner wasn't just anyone, he was Theo, a symbol of generational Black brilliance, a bridge between the safe familiarity of television and the raw, unfiltered voices the industry so often tries to mute. So when we're told he vanished under natural circumstances, we have to ask, what exactly are we not being told? Here's where it starts getting weird. A second man, 29 years old, from Nicaragua, entered the water during the same incident. His identity still tightly sealed. Authorities claim he was trying to rescue Warner, yet even after his full recovery and discharge from the hospital, no photos, no interviews, not even a name. Why? If this man was simply a good Samaritan, why is the public being kept in the dark? And why was Warner, a capable swimmer, according to friends, suddenly overtaken by a current in an area not known for fatal tides? Playa Grande's currents are strong, sure, but they're also well-mapped, well-patrolled, and on that day, relatively calm. Something doesn't add up.
So unbelievable there. And Branson, I also was reading that just days ago, he had another podcast episode that was dropped, and now a lot of fans are starting to really listen to that as maybe one of his last times that you hear him.
And then there's the timing. Just days before his sudden passing, Warner released what would now become his final podcast episode. Not All Hood, his brainchild, had only been live for a month, but this episode stood out. It wasn't casual, it wasn't cozy, it was a challenge, a full-throated reckoning with how the media and Hollywood exploit Black culture, twisting it into digestible stereotypes and repackaging it for profit. He said it outright. There is an aspect of just living in this country where so much of the deck has been stacked against us. In hindsight, it sounded less like commentary and more like warning. Was he aware that saying these things out loud to a growing audience might put him on a path that's historically ended in silence? Because let's be honest, we've seen this pattern before. Outspoken, successful Black entertainers start peeling back the curtains, start naming names, start shaking the comfort zone of an industry built on staying pretty and profitable. And then, something happens. From Prince to Nipsey, from Chadwick to Michael, the list grows longer and the endings more sudden. Warner was no wild card. He was controlled, sharp, measured, which makes the content of his last public statements even more jarring. It felt like he was gearing up to expose something, and maybe someone.
Just wanted to remind you, as I remind myself, that no matter what's going on, there's always a reason to smile. Like if you just take a minute to stop and take stock, I guarantee you can find at least one reason to smile. And if for some reason you can't find a reason to smile, then that's probably the best time to be the reason for somebody else to smile.
We can't ignore what some are calling the blacklist theory, an underground list of industry names that certain Hollywood power players quietly circulate when a celebrity becomes too disruptive, too vocal, too honest. The list allegedly includes actors, musicians, and directors who suddenly stopped getting roles, saw deals mysteriously evaporate, or worse, met abrupt and unexplained ends. Could Warner have been added to that list? And if so, who decided his voice had become too dangerous? Look at the timing again. The podcast goes live in early June. By mid-July, he's talking legacy, media manipulation, and cultural theft with a level of frankness we hadn't heard before. Then, less than 2 weeks later, he's gone. And while his family grieves, while tributes pour in from castmates and fans, the Costa Rican government quietly wraps its investigation in a bow labeled accidental. Nothing to see here, folks. No interviews with family, no photos of the rescue scene, no follow-up with the mysterious second swimmer, not even a press conference. just a gentle fade to black.
Morning swim, he had gone out to the coastline just before sunrise, and a little after sunrise, got into the water. Not too many details about what exactly happened once he was in the water, but authorities did end up finding his body actually hundreds of yards away down the shoreline. His body was discovered in a rocky cove. It was brushed up against that rocky cove.
But here's something even more curious: the rescuer. This unnamed man was in critical condition just hours after Warner's body was pulled from the water. Yet within 48 hours, he's not only alive, but discharged without complications, according to Dre Mauricio Solano Corella. Fast turnaround for someone allegedly dragged under by the same fatal current. Too fast? We're not saying this man wasn't trying to help, but the question remains, was he there just to help? Or was he there at all for reasons we're not being told? Some whispers suggest the man may have been part of Warner's entourage, though officially the Judicial Investigation Agency insists he had no known connection. Still, eyewitnesses on the beach said the interaction looked anything but random. The man didn't just dive in, he was already in the water, close by, watching. Is it a coincidence that a podcast host known for dissecting cultural control suddenly drowns while a stranger attempts to save him and then vanishes into anonymity?
Really was a multi-decade career in Hollywood, spanning several different shows. I did a little bit of research before this, and he had about 84 credits on his resume before passing away at just 54 years old. And TMZ also obtained photo, possibly the last photo of him that we may even have ever seen on TMZ.com at the airport on July 13th coming into Costa Rica. It's just so tragic to look at that photo and think that just a week later he'd be passing away.
We've scoured the incident reports and something keeps coming up. Vague language. Apparently swept away, bystanders attempted to rescue, taken to shore. Not one detailed timeline, not one definitive account of how Warner went under, who saw what first, or what condition he was in when he was pulled out. That kind of haze doesn't surround regular drownings, especially not high-profile ones. So we have to ask, what's being left out and why? And let's not forget what Warner himself once said in a 2013 interview: "I have peace of mind, and for me, you can't put a price on that." He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He had a family, a wife and daughter he kept away from the spotlight on purpose. He was building something quieter, something real. So why, just as he was finally curating a platform to speak freely, did that voice go silent? His co-hosts on the podcast, Weesey Baraka and Candace Kelly, have remained publicly quiet since the news broke. No new episodes, no memorial special, nothing. It's as if the entire operation was snuffed out overnight. And while the world mourns the actor, few seem to be connecting the dots on the advocate, the activist, the voice behind a podcast that was just starting to rattle cages.
And I think what so many people can appreciate is he was a true creative. He talked about African-American culture in such a beautiful way. I think Wendell Pierce put it best when I saw something that he posted. He challenged himself in music, art, cinema, spoken word, and writing. He had a huge capacity for joy. He exercised his right of self-determination.
Even Eddie Griffin, his former co-star and longtime friend, left breadcrumbs in his tribute. "We went to war with the Hollywood machine, and sometimes with each other, because that's what brothers do." That phrase, "went to war with the Hollywood machine." What war were they fighting? And who was fighting back? We know that in the last few years, Warner had begun mentoring younger actors, pushing them to ask harder questions about the roles they accepted and the images they helped project. He wasn't just a nostalgic figure from an old sitcom. He was actively challenging the very system that once made him famous, a system that, according to more than a few insiders, doesn't take kindly to critiques coming from within the ranks. And here we are. A beloved actor passed away under mysterious circumstances, a rescuer whose name no one will share, a podcast episode that, in hindsight, reads like a farewell letter wrapped in warning. And still, no press coverage asking the questions that are clawing at the edges of this story. Just the same quiet headlines: drowning confirmed, tragic, loss, gone too soon. But we're not letting go that easily, because something doesn't feel finished. There are details that don't belong, timelines that don't hold up, and a man who, up until his last breath, was trying to tell us something, whether the world was ready to hear it or not.
Historic and frozen in time is this iconic character. What did that mean for television, and what does it still mean to this day?
Sam, Theo Huxtable was me. Theo Huxtable was my brothers. Theo Huxtable was the first time someone that looked like me saw someone that looked like himself on television. He was the epitome of what we as kids, in a certain community were growing up.
So we widen the lens and look at the pattern the industry keeps pretending not to see. We remember how Chadwick Boseman's illness was kept private while he worked relentlessly, how Kobe Bryant's helicopter fell from the sky on a fog-choked morning, how Nipsey Hussle's community rebuilding push ended on a sidewalk that should have been protected ground. Different causes, different settings, same cultural impact, powerful Black figures who symbolize strength, ownership, reinvention. They were more than performers or athletes. They were architects of narrative, reshaping how we see ourselves, how the world sees us. And every time one of those voices goes quiet, we're told it's random, tragic, nothing more. How many times do we let coincidence carry the whole burden before we admit it starts to look like a template? We're not saying the same hand guided every loss. We are saying the industry benefits every time an uncompromising Black storyteller stops talking.
What do you want people to remember about him?
Oh boy. He was never afraid to go to his room and study and make sure he followed whatever he had learned in the acting school.
That's where Warner lands in this uncomfortable constellation. He wasn't just reminiscing about the old days, he was reframing legacy, confronting gatekeepers, pushing conversations about mental wellness, respectability optics, and the chronic misrepresentation of Black culture. He had reach, he had trust, and crucially, he had nothing left to prove to the machine. That combination tends to set off alarms in back rooms we never see. Former publicists whisper that lists exist, unofficial, naturally, where executives informally rank who's manageable, who's volatile, and who's a risk to the brand's long-term story. We've heard from two separate managers who worked with major studios in the 2010s that once someone is tagged as a threat to the smooth operation, the response is not always a blatant blacklist. It's quieter, deals stall, invitations dry up, their public image is gradually recoded as difficult, or, in the most chilling cases, tragedies get framed as neat, uncontested acts of fate.
Turning now to a Hollywood tragedy, we're all trying to process this. Of course, we're talking about the death of actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner. He is just 54 years old. Officials say that he drowned while on vacation with his family. He was in Costa Rica at the time.
Then we zero back in on Costa Rica, because that choice matters. Warner was intentional about work, about family, about what he put his name on. Costa Rica sells serenity, pura vida, offshore retreats and eco-lodges where U.S. investors park retirement money and tech bros set up remote havens. But anyone who's spent time digging into regional politics knows the other side. Pockets of corruption that rarely make U.S. front pages, land disputes that move quietly through courts, and a tourism structure that's learned to keep a tight lid on scandals that might dent the marketing brochure. If you wanted a high-profile African-American figure to suffer something that could be spun as an ordinary vacation tragedy, you couldn't pick a more photogenic, plausible stage. We ask, why Playa Grande specifically? Why that day, early afternoon, when beaches are busiest and lifeguards, even if understaffed, are still around? Why a current not flagged as particularly vicious that week? Why a second anonymous swimmer who conveniently survives, gets stabilized, and disappears? DRA Mauricio Solano Corella told People that the 29-year-old was treated, found to be stable, and was discharged without complications. We acknowledge the statement. We also acknowledge that a man described as critical hours before doesn't usually clear paperwork and vanish from public view without a single controlled media appearance, not even a carefully managed PR sit-down to say he tried his best. That's not how high-profile rescues play out, unless someone wants them not to.
Yes, obviously so heartbreaking. Such a tragedy. Here in the office, so many Cosby Show fans of this wonderful actor, and he had a very long career even after the show that he was known for.
And then there's the autopsy, asphyxiation by submersion, the official phrasing, filed fast, wrapped up even faster. Costa Rica's Judicial Investigation Police have their procedures, and we respect that. But the speed is a character in this story. Exceptions get made when the attention is global. Here, the curtain came down almost on cue. We've seen that precision before when the narrative needs to be finalized before inconvenient questions begin to multiply. We've watched studios deploy D3ATH like smoke bombs when a project collapses under internal scandal. We've watched whole marketing departments pivot in a day to reframe a headline. We're supposed to believe an investigation that clean and conclusive on an international figure wasn't insulated by a similar communications playbook? Consider what his podcast threatened to do long term. He wasn't trying to grab clicks with messy confessionals. He was building an archive. Mental wellness in Black communities, the mislabeling of African dance traditions as provocative content for Western audiences, the double standard of who gets to be complex and who gets flattened into archetype. That kind of project, if it builds a loyal base, starts cross-pollinating into classrooms, think tanks, community centers, it birthed spin-off content, panels, books, tours, money, influence, intellect, all outside the more controllable television pipeline, the kind of thing Hollywood can't co-opt without rewriting itself. We know how that usually ends.
In terms of the things that continue to perpetuate the negative stereotype of people of color, we've always had the Cosby Show to hold up against that.
And let's revisit that word legacy again, because that's where this gets even heavier. When Samantha Shepard, the Cornell cinema scholar, called this loss a significant cultural loss, she was naming the exact leverage Warner had. He was still Theo for millions who grew up watching him every night. He had the ear of Gen X and the nostalgic loyalty of early millennials, but he was also Grammy-recognized, newly active in the podcast circuit, and mentoring. It's not hard to map who would have complexity fatigue about a figure like that refusing to flatten out. In the face of what others considered enough success, he kept expanding the narrative. He refused to be a relic. We can't overlook how often that trait earns a target. We move back to the pattern because this isn't happening in a vacuum. These last few years, we've watched the celebrated and the controversial alike get run through the same grinder. Spontaneous tragedies, sudden health collapses, freak transportation incidents, freak water incidents, freak everything. The FBI never shows up because none of it meets the threshold of an obvious external crime. Studios mourn, brands post black and white tributes, everyone moves on, except the communities who see the connective tissue in the shadows. There's a growing mistrust that official reports and industry eulogies are telling the whole truth. And to be blunt, why should we assume they are?
What's good? Yes, I got the flower in my hair. Today's my daughter's birthday. She put the flower there, so I'm rocking it. What? It's a beautiful day here in Atlanta. I just wanted to shout out and just spread some love and some good cheer. And, you know, life is out here lifing, right? For me and for everybody else. But
people around Warner know he was cautious about where he took his family, careful about security, deliberate about schedules. We spoke with the former road manager who asked to remain unnamed because of current contracts, who said Warner didn't do spontaneous in unfamiliar countries, not without checks. That statement collides with the idea that he just waltzed into a deceptive current without anyone on watch. So did someone recommend Playa Grande? Did a travel concierge linked to entertainment companies help arrange it? Was there a fixer working behind the scenes who knew precisely where the current runs and how fast first responders can be delayed by jurisdictional red tape? These are the kinds of questions that get asked when too many randoms line up. Zooming out, we also need to study the fine print around the Costa Rican emergency response timeline. 3 ambulances, 2 adult male patients. The Red Cross said both were out of the water when paramedics arrived. If that's true, who pulled them out? How many bystanders were involved? Were any of them trained? Why has not a single one surfaced on social media telling their story for clout? A sadly predictable impulse in our era. Silence can come from respect. It can also come from signatures on legal forms.
Dad, the salesman said this will last a lifetime. And just think, if I live to be 90, that's about $1 a year.
And because we're talking legal, let's not pretend Hollywood hasn't learned how to operate globally with the same discipline it uses domestically. Crisis communications firms in LA and New York maintain teams fluent in Spanish, French, Portuguese, whatever is needed to ensure international incidents don't mutate into domestic PR nightmares. If Warner's final podcast wave was interpreted by the wrong executives as the beginning of a larger, uncontrollable message campaign, it wouldn't take a Bond villain to manage perception. Just a coordinated set of phone calls, some no comments, and a fast-acting foreign bureaucracy grateful not to be dragged into U.S. culture wars. Meanwhile, we noticed the tributes, genuine, heartfelt, and carefully phrased. Tracee Ellis Ross, what an actor and friend you were. Warm, gentle, present, kind, thoughtful, deep, funny, elegant. Beyonce's site, Rest in Power, Malcolm-Jamal Warner. These aren't your usual scripted condolences, they're sincere. But they also mark the boundary of what's allowed to be said publicly. No one with a platform big enough to really shake the room is asking out loud why we still don't know the rescuer's name, why the record's closed so neatly, why Warner's new podcast feed went quiet like a switch flipped on the back end. That omission speaks almost as loudly as the sympathy.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, an actor who rose to fame as the beloved Theo Huxtable on 8 seasons of The Cosby Show, died on Sunday.
What is this?
Officials say the 54-year-old was swimming at a Costa Rican beach.
We have to also weigh the unglamorous reality. Maybe it was a tragic accident. Full stop. Maybe currents don't care about careful people. Maybe the rescuer wants privacy. That's the official line, and it might be true. But when we put it next to the larger pattern, the string of Black icons who link authenticity to rebellion and then exit in ways that leave a trail of ellipses, we're left with a knot in the throat we can't swallow. Because whether or not there's a clandestine blacklist, whether or not the Hollywood machine nudged anything in Costa Rica, the system still wins when a voice like his goes quiet and the public is told not to think too hard about it.
We show, and Theo's character in particular.
Yeah, and he moved around with such integrity,
Yes.
and he is very intentional about the roles that he took.
Exactly right.
His legacy is going to last forever. He will be missed. Our love goes out to his family and our thoughts and prayers. Tarika, thank you.
Which brings us back to the warning embedded in his final project. Not all hood was never about clout, it was about plurality, showing how wide and layered Black identity really is. How the simplified version that sells on television is an erasure dressed up as representation. If you're running an industry comfortable with that erasure, the last thing you want is a former sitcom son with cross-generational credibility turning his mic into a lantern and walking into the basement. We felt it in our bones. He was about to go deeper, press on power, name the unnamed dynamics. Now that journey has been interrupted, and the questions are hanging in the air like static. Though here's where we leave it for now. We're staring at a calm beach with a turbulent story, a silent rescuer with a loud absence, an accidental ruling wrapped in suspicious speed, and a final podcast that reads like a manifesto interrupted. We're staring at a list of Black legends who challenged the script and were gone before the third act, and we have to ask the only question that matters. If someone like Malcolm-Jamal Warner could be silenced right after he sharpened his message, who's next on the board? Tell us what you see, tell us what you think, and tell us who you don't trust, because the pattern is either coincidence or it's a playbook. We'll be watching the comments and we're not done digging. Stay loud, stay sharp, and until next time, hold your breath, but not your truth.